I'm very proud this evening to present the Ella Baker and Cesar Chavez Award to Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock. Senator Warnock is the pastor of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church called America's Freedom Church, where Martin Luther King once pastored alongside his own father. And he was recently elected as the first African American to represent Georgia in the Senate in a groundbreaking election. Political activism and ministry are intertwined in the Black church, as we know so well, and that has been the case throughout Warnock's career. Over the years, he's advocated for expanding Medicaid, protecting the voting rights of marginalized Americans, opposing the death penalty, supporting abortion rights, and advocating for same-sex marriage. And so tonight we honor him for his work, for his fight for justice, for his work for equity, with the Ella Baker and Cesar Chavez Award for Positive Community Development. Congratulations, Senator.
Thank you so very much. I'm deeply honored and glad to be here with you.
We've named this award for Ella Baker and Cesar Chavez because not just they've worked for justice, but also that they've also sought to ensure that both youth and the unheard are central to their vision of justice work. And so I wonder, as you reflect on your career, as you reflect on your work in the faith and political space, what do you see as the role of community organizing, of youth organizing in the movement for social change?
I began my ministry and my work as an activist as a young person. And we need young people. They are absolutely essential to the work of activism, the work of justice making in the world. When you look at a lot of our movements, there's no replacement for the energy of the young. Not only do they bring their energy, they bring a kind of idealism, a kind of creative discontent with things as they are, a restlessness of the soul that says it can be better than this. And we are in a moment yet again in our country when we certainly can use that. The first time I got arrested in an act of civil disobedience, I was a young graduate student in seminary working on a PhD at Union Theological Seminary in New York. And there was an African immigrant by the name of Amadou Diallo, who was shot dozens of times by a unit within the New York Police Department while reaching for his own wallet on his own front step. And they shot dozens of times, hit him several times, and throngs of New Yorkers rose up in that moment, responding to that injustice. It was the first time I got arrested in an act of civil disobedience. That was in 1998, I guess, 1999.
Absolutely. And I would, point out in 1998, we were probably marching together. That was the fourth year of the Brotherhood Sister Soul. And we were out there protesting the killing of Amadou Diallo. To your point, we were out there protesting the killing of Sean Bell.
Yes.
We were out there protesting the torture and assault on Abner Louima. And I always remember when finally, Amadou Diallo's mother arrived in the United States and went to the location where her son had been shot down with all those police bullets. And she just wailed his name over and over again. It's a moment and a sound that has stayed with me all these years of a mother's cry coming across the Atlantic Ocean and, what she witnessed that day. And to your point, the fact that you have Eric Garner killed by the New York City police and his last words are, "I can't breathe."
Right.
And George Floyd's last words are, "I can't breathe," both of them calling for their mother. There is a horrific cyclical nature to all of this that is, sobering. We know these realities of what the changes have been, but we also know how much has not changed. And when we consider the expansive systemic racism that continues, inequality with regards to wealth and criminal justice and education and housing, so many other areas, I wonder where you see the movement for equity and equality right now. Are you hopeful?
Well, we have to keep working on these issues. And, let's be honest, Kari, when you do this work, it is exhausting. The struggles are long. Justice work is not for the faint of heart. You have a lot of losses. And every now and then you move 2 steps forward, and then there's a backlash that moves you 1 step back, and you have to have the courage and the wherewithal to live to fight another day. And so I'm inspired by the ways in which I'm seeing young people stand up in this moment. I'm going to do everything I can as a United States Senator to make sure that we protect voting rights. That's a fight that we're engaged in right now
Mhm.
here in the state of Georgia. You mentioned my historic election. The truth is, there are those who were not happy at all
That's right.
by the ways in which Georgians stood up in historic numbers and produced a historic result. And now the politicians who don't like the outcome are trying, rather than changing their message and changing their agenda, they're busy trying to change the rules. And so I'm a sponsor right now of something called the For the People Act. It will expand access to voting, make sure that no matter what state you live in, you have access to mail-in voting, early voting. It will prohibit states from uh, easily purging people from the rolls for the kinds of questionable reasons that Georgia uses to purge people from the rolls. It's about expanding the franchise. And so there are a lot of fights that we've got to engage in, but I happen to believe that voting rights are preservative of all other rights.
Yeah.
And in this moment, by pushing through the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which will provide the kind of oversight and protection that we've had in the past that we lost in 2013. That's a big part of where the fight is for me.
Where does the movement go next? When you think about where we've come from, when you think about where we are, where do you see the movement going forward?
An issue that I've worked on for years. I started in a real sense there as a seminary student in New York, working on the whole issue of mass incarceration. We, do a lot of work, and many of us are focused on police brutality. But police brutality is the predictable and tragic consequence of America's uh, carceral state, a kind of massive prison industrial complex that has made the land of the free the incarceration capital of the world. We are about 4 or 5% of the world's population. We warehouse 25% of the world's prisoners. Mass incarceration, for me, is perhaps the clearest uh, iteration and reinscribing of the Jim Crow segregation that Dr. King and others stood up against. Um, we have now 2.5 million people in America's prisons.
That's right.
25% of the world's prisoners. And then when they get out, they're still incarcerated, because once you carry the mark of convicted felon, voting rights is legal.
That's right.
Housing discrimination, legal. Job discrimination, legal. If you build a carceral system as massive as ours is, police brutality is as predictable as it is tragic, because you have built the beast that demands to be fed, and this beast consumes Black and brown children. And if we say that we are descendants of the spiritual and moral legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., of Ella Baker, of Cesar Chavez, we have to indeed be engaged on this front and with this issue.
The Brotherhood Sister Soul, our young people and our organization organizes on many of the issues you talk about. Our young people were front and center on the issue to reform and restrict the unconstitutional practice of stop and frisk in this city that criminalized so many Black and brown men with the over supervision of the police in our community. They were the ones on the front lines talking about what those experiences were like, creating art and poetry, named litigants in the Floyd case, testifying, going on news channels and talking about their experience. Our young people in our organization work to shut Rikers Island, the stain that it is on the city of New York, named for a man who made his money off of the tracking of freed enslaved people and returning them to slavery in the South. You talk about the fact that there's a push on a national level to protect voting rights. We know Georgia passed a draconian law to further restrict access to voting. We know across this nation over 350 voter suppression laws have been proposed this year, targeting Black and Latinx and immigrant people. And so when we think about movements in this country for change, it's always been the intersection of organizing and activism, litigation work to support that, policy work, and so often faith-based work. And you intersect with all of those areas. And so when we think about voting as being absolutely central, but we also think about the forces that are arrayed against us, I wonder how you think of the path forward. How do we defeat those forces that are literally trying to stop people from their enfranchisement and for their ability to vote?
You know, I run into young people all the time who say my vote doesn't count.
Right.
Well, my goodness, if your vote didn't count, people are certainly doing backflips and everything else, tying themselves in knots, trying to take something away from you that doesn't make a difference. Think about that. That doesn't make sense. They're trying to take your franchise away from you because they know that it is a valuable thing. And so I want to say to the young folk who are being nurtured by this amazing organization that has been doing such incredible work for so long, raise your voice, read widely, stay engaged, talk to the elders. We need the wisdom of the generations before us. They've learned some lessons that come only through experience. And so listen, but also speak. Speak with your vote, speak with your voice, organize, organize, organize. It does make a difference. Look what's going on here in Georgia. First of all, we've been organizing for about a decade here in this state. When you look at me, the first Black senator from Georgia, that didn't happen by accident.
Right.
We've been organizing for years, fighting hard against voter suppression, registering people that other people said would never vote. And those folks stood up in a historic election. They sent the first Black senator and the first Jewish senator from Georgia. And then, yes, you have these movements forward, and then there's an attempted backlash. And so that's what's happening right now, not only in Georgia, but in states all across the country. People have seen our power. They see the new emerging American electorate. It is multiracial. It is multi-faith. And it frightens some people. And so there's this kind of backlash. But we have to stand up in this moment and know that when we stand together, we win. You know, let me close in this way. I had the honor of serving as pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, spiritual home of Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis.
That's right.
And when I was preparing to preside over John Lewis's funeral just a few months ago, as I was writing the words with which I would open the service, I asked myself, I wonder what he was thinking when he was crossing that Edmund Pettus Bridge. I don't know, but here's what I do know. I know that he was not thinking, one day, if I stand up, somebody's going to give me a Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Right.
One day I'm going to be championed as a hero all around the country and across the world. That didn't cross his mind, and I'm sure he could not even have imagined that to be the case. He crossed that bridge because it was the right thing to do. And all he was trying to do that day probably was to stay alive. Hopefully he would stay alive, make it across that bridge alive. And he had made a decision, like so many others, that even if he lost that battle, and perhaps even lost his life, that we would win the war. That the long arc, the arc of the universe is long, as Dr. King used to say, but it bends toward justice. And that is the job of all of us to bend that arc a little closer to justice. And so stand up where you are. You never know the impact you're having, and we never know when the dam will break. But it's raining. It's raining truth. It's raining justice. It's raining humanity. Keep coming. Keep marching. Together we win.